The reality can no longer be ignored, and every attempt to deny it is crumbling. The very circle that once ridiculed your insights is now desperately trying to contain the chaos you predicted. What's unfolding isn't just awkward, it's a total implosion of their carefully constructed fantasies. And regardless of their efforts, your quiet resolve speaks volumes over their frantic justifications. They are trapped. They can't reframe this. Every caution you voiced is now materializing before them. You see, the most daunting aspect of being right isn't the act of speaking up. It's the instant the world understands it dismissed you. And for those who see clearly, that moment has arrived. You are navigating the fallout of a tempest you sensed long before others felt the first drop. While they celebrated under an artificial sun, you were observing the fractures in their horizon. Now the deluge has stripped away their carefully crafted surfaces. The community is reeling, not because the crisis hit, but because you were the one who foresaw it. They believed you were amplifying. They thought you were reading too deeply. Some claimed you were inventing conflict. But now the deception, the falsehoods, the hidden agendas, they're no longer rumors in the shadows. They are confirmed, their message too vast to conceal. And the individuals who scorned your foresight are now gasping in the debris of their own refusal to see. Before we go further, let me be clear. Your presence here is no coincidence. You're aligned with this awakening, this circle of clarity, and I want to express my gratitude for holding this awareness. If these words resonate with you already, tap that like button and subscribe. It's a powerful method to ensure this awareness expands further. Consider it a declaration, a way of stating we are conscious of the events unfolding, and we refuse to stay silent. Now let's return to the current situation. Psychology identifies what they're going through as cognitive dissonance. It's the mental conflict that erupts when undeniable truth clashes with a deeply held falsehood. Their psyche locks up. They are suspended between two realities, the fiction they constructed and the actuality now breaking through. This is the prison your adversaries now inhabit. Cornered, agitated, tormented. They maintain public composure, but in private, they are restless in the dead of night. Their search histories are filled with frantic queries like, how to reverse negative energy, or why do I feel so unveiled? The stark irony. They once ridiculed you for believing in cosmic justice. They assumed they could manipulate indefinitely, that their disguises would never fail, that their secrets would remain interred. But existence has a way of pulling concealed matters into the open. And when it happens, those who ignored your cautions feel more than shame. They feel pursued by the very reality they attempted to suppress. Reflect on our past. Every visionary, every reformer, every truth-bringer was initially met with ridicule. They mocked those who claimed the world was round. They laughed at pioneers who spoke of human flight. They scorned those who exposed systemic rot before it was proven. But who had the final say? Those who remained anchored in what was real. And that is precisely your position now, on the brink of confirmation, awakened souls. This transcends mere admission of your accuracy. It's about their dawning realization that your perception cut straight through their deceptions. You didn't just predict a result. You uncovered a complete structure of malfunction, an entire culture constructed on untruths. And that's why they're not just uneasy. They are destabilized. They are afraid because they understand that if you were correct about this, you might be right about matters they haven't even confessed to themselves yet. Your present silence is deafening. You are under no obligation to debate. You don't need to reiterate your past statements. Your mere presence is enough, and their own unease consumes them. That is true authority. Your calm truth rattling their loud rejections. It's like standing on a field after the conflict subsides. The opposition is wounded, disoriented, and abruptly conscious they were fighting a battle they were destined to lose. Some will continue the charade naturally. They will display grins, post hollow inspirational messages, and act as if their foundation is intact. But behind the scenes, they are fragmenting. They are making hushed calls. They are composing insincere justifications they'll never publish. They are gossiping more intensely because quiet frightens them. They are coming undone because the future you outlined has become the present. And now the responsibility rests solely with them. This is your season of confirmation. You aren't imagining it. The change is tangible. The same group that once marginalized you is now glancing around anxiously. questioning who else perceived the upheaval, wondering what other insights you possess that have yet to be unveiled. And the reality is, you don't even need to reveal them. The passage of time is handling the task for you. Their falsehoods are collapsing under their own lack of substance. Awakened soul, let this resonate deeply. You don't require retaliation. You don't need to boast. Your power lies in your quiet understanding. While they struggle, you remain firm. While they shake, you breathe deeply, because you always knew the cosmos misses nothing. And now the whole world is learning that lesson too. And to you, the one seeing this clearly, I'm speaking to you directly right now. Can you sense the transformation in the atmosphere? The entire community is unsettled, not because the crisis occurred, but because you stood in your truth when no one else had the courage. That's why you need to focus and stay connected. What follows in this message isn't accidental. It's the precise layout of how everything you foresaw is finally breaking into the open. If you've ever felt overlooked, mocked, or labeled irrational, this is your moment of confirmation, and you must hear every single word. So, here is my request. Pause for one moment. Press that like button and subscribe immediately. This isn't just for my benefit. It's your way of signaling to the cosmos, I am anchored in my strength, and I am prepared for what's next. And while you're here, leave a comment with the number 111 if you feel that affirming energy within you. Because what comes next? It will penetrate deeper, strike with more force, and reaffirm why their apprehension is the evidence of your resilience. Now, let's examine it in detail. They labeled you irrational, but your vision was accurate. Sometimes the ultimate consequence for a deceiver isn't being caught. It's surviving long enough to see the truth they denied consume them entirely. That is your opponent's current state. They once called you alarmist, theatrical, pessimistic, but the fact is this: you weren't paranoid. You were perceptive. You weren't frozen in anxiety. You were attuned to frequencies the rest were too blinded, too complacent, or too deceitful to acknowledge. You detected the embers long before the fire was visible, and while they mocked your alerts, you were silently fortifying yourself for the inferno they're now caught within. They tried to distort your reality because that's the classic strategy. You're imagining things. You're overcomplicating it. You're too intense. Does that resonate? They couldn't challenge the facts you presented, so they assaulted your awareness. And you, truth seer, may have even questioned your own mind for a time, wondering if perhaps they were correct. But you weren't mistaken. You were ahead of the curve. Truth often arrives late, but when it appears, it commands the space. Observe the present. The same people who dismissed you are now restless at 3 a.m., murmuring pleas they once derided, searching online for ways to erase negative cycles under anonymous profiles. Your intuition was never your foe. It was your guide. You didn't require tangible proof then, because your inner knowing had already compiled the data. That isn't irrationality. That is acuity. That is discernment. That is your internal navigation system performing a task theirs could not. And you know the paradox. The very ones who accused you of being fragile are now overwhelmed by the reality you attempted to highlight. They're not just ashamed, they are frightened. Because if you are correct about this, what other truths might you perceive that they haven't begun to confront? This is the result when someone detects the shift before it becomes obvious. You felt the disloyalty before the admission. You detected the untruths before the revelation. You interpreted the situation when others were blind. That is a capability, not a flaw. They called it delusion, because the truth was too heavy for them to carry, not because you were incorrect. Now the unseen has become seen. The subtle strain you identified is now erupting. The atmosphere you noted, everyone senses it now, but the opportunity has passed. Consider it like a weather system. Most only acknowledge it when the storm hits. But you, awakened soul, detected the shift in the air before the first cloud formed. You were being extra only because you were premature. And what did you accomplish in that lead time? You didn't spread disorder. You didn't engage in rumors. You didn't boast. You made ready. While they indulged in denial, you were constructing your stability. While they risked their futures, you secured your spirit. You were organizing your inner world because you knew what was approaching, even without the words to explain it. And now witness the difference. While they spiral, you are solid. While they search for escape, you are rooted. That isn't chance. That is the reward for trusting your perception. And yet you might be asking now, why does it still ache? Why doesn't it feel triumphant? Because being correct often feels isolating. Confirmation isn't always celebratory. Sometimes it's quiet, but don't misinterpret that quiet for void. It is potency. Your silence is now resonant, and they perceive it even without a single utterance. You don't require payback. You already possess it. It's named being validated in a world that insisted you were mistaken. That is the type of vindication that endures. It remains. It forces them to glance backward with every new revelation, questioning if you were aware of this one too. They're not just uneasy. They are shaken because they cannot gauge how much more you have already perceived. That's why they're gossiping more, deflecting more loudly, and pretending even harder. Their act is their admission. This is your moment to grasp something essential. You're not irrational. You're not damaged. You're not excessive. You are prepared. You were given a keener vision for a purpose. And yes, it is painful to be the one who sees sharply in a world founded on mirages, but it is also freeing. It means you aren't surprised when the disguises fall. It means you are liberated from the snare they're now entangled in. You might even feel anger surfacing. Anger at the mockery, the dismissal, being branded the issue for speaking reality. That anger is justified. But let it become propulsion, not destruction. Because here is the truly powerful action. You don't even have to utter, "I warned you." Your peace communicates it for you. Your steadiness communicates it for you. The serene manner you're navigating this turmoil is more potent than any charge you could make. Do you perceive the dynamic? Their efforts to mute you resulted in their own muteness. Their attempt to undermine you became their own undermining. You don't need to pursue them with proof. Reality itself is the pursuer. Every secret they tried to bury is emerging independently. Every lie they built their identity upon is disintegrating without your intervention. That isn't merely karma. That is the natural outcome of existing in denial when the truth is standing before you. And here's another question you might hold. What is the next step? How do I wield this awareness? The response is straightforward. Remain steady. Don't be drawn into their turmoil. Don't descend to their level. Your discernment is your authority. Wear it, but don't use it as a blade. The cosmos is already managing their code. You simply continue advancing, aware with confidence. That is how you succeed. Because while they are submerged in the flood they refuse to acknowledge was coming, you're already on secure footing. And you didn't arrive there by chance. You arrived by trusting what you sensed when everyone else claimed you were mistaken. They called you irrational. But your vision was accurate, and now they must inhabit the world they manufactured. The same world you transcended by believing in yourself. The quiet that echoes more profoundly than their rejection. Music. First, they ridicule you. Then they resist you. Then they imitate you. Then they pretend you were never there. That is the pattern of truth. An awakened one, you are positioned directly within its flow. When you first spoke, they behaved as if your words were toxic. They sneered, smirked, and talked about you privately. They didn't reject you because you were inaccurate. They rejected you because the truth you held was too piercing for their delicate stability. Reflect on this. Truth doesn't flourish in mobs. Mobs desire distraction, not illumination. Mobs want the fantasy, not the interruption. That's why your speech wasn't welcomed as insight. It was received as a threat. You weren't the sickness. You were the antidote. But in a space full of individuals addicted to their delusions, the antidote feels like toxin. They needed your silence to continue feeding on the falsehoods that supported their existence. Here is a difficult reality. The truth is repelled by crowds but spreads in quiet. They couldn't bear it when you spoke it. But now your silence is resonating more powerfully than their clamor. They can't cease replaying your statements in their minds. The dialogues they once ignored, the cautions they once laughed at, they're hearing them again like a recurring echo. That's why they avoid your gaze. Because now they call every word you shared. Envision this. You once stood among people amusing themselves at your expense for suggesting the vessel was taking on water. They ridiculed you, celebrated their luck, and instructed you to stop being pessimistic. And now that same vessel is sinking, and they're searching for safety that isn't there. Who do you think they're thinking of now? The one they laughed at, the one they called dramatic, the one they told to be quiet, or envision another scenario. You alerted them to flaws in the base. They told you to calm down, said you were too harsh. But now the structure is fracturing, and the ground is shaking. The quiet you maintain now, it is the most powerful unspoken validation existence could provide. You don't need to do a thing. The fractures are speaking on your behalf. That is what unsettles them. It's not merely that you were correct. It's that you've ceased trying to demonstrate it. You're not seeking endorsement. You're not justifying your position. You're not chasing their acceptance. You've become quiet, and that quiet frightens them more than your words ever could. Why? Because quiet compels people to reflect. And your quiet is compelling them to confront what they've been evading. Truth doesn't yell, it waits. And when it finally communicates, it doesn't debate. It affirms that's the phase you're in currently. Your truth doesn't require a mob. It just requires duration. And duration has found them. Perhaps you've pondered, why didn't they hear me when I offered help? Why didn't they treat my words seriously? The explanation is simple. They couldn't risk it. If you were right, their entire reality would fragment. Their connections, their standing, their self-image, they all relied on the falsehood. It was simpler to brand you resentful, theatrical, or excessive than it was to face their own denial. They needed you to be wrong because your truth was the force destined to dismantle the house they built on instability. But denial only functions until reality enters uninvited. And that's the current event. The quiet is becoming pervasive. Individuals who once mocked you are now speaking privately. They're replaying your exchanges, linking clues they previously ignored. They're observing the disintegration of everything they tried to preserve. And it's dawning on them. You were never the issue. Their terror of truth was. Silence is not a vacuum. It's saturated with solutions. That's what they're discovering. Every time you choose not to speak, it abandons them with their own reflections. And those reflections are merciless. They're beginning to remember every caution you offered, every instinct you felt, every uncomfortable reality you presented. They don't recall the rumors or the noise anymore. They recall your voice, and that memory is their penalty. Envision this as well. Silence is like an incomplete tune stuck in someone's thoughts. It cycles, it recurs, it persists. They are plagued by your melody because you never provided an ending. You never took back your words, never apologized for your foresight, never pleaded for them to view you differently. You left it unresolved, and now they're compelled to echo a tune they once denied existed. And here is the most severe paradox. The quiet that once made them feel dominant now makes them feel impotent. They believed suppressing you, overlooking you, or outvoting you gave them authority. But the truth doesn't vanish when ignored. It grows in the darkness. It spreads silently like flames beneath the surface until it erupts where all can witness it. That's the current event. The quiet you've maintained has been spreading. It's affecting their thoughts, affecting their dialogues, affecting their tranquility. Now they murmur the very concepts they once denounced. They repeat your phrases as if they originated them. They behave as if they've just uncovered what you've always understood. And isn't that the ultimate evidence? The same voices that tried to erase you are now reviving your truth in private. They didn't acknowledge you, but internally they know its source. They know you expressed it first. They know you carried it when it was unwelcome. And that awareness is what consumes them. Truth doesn't need advocates. It just needs those who endure. And awakened one, you endured. You persevered through the mockery, the exclusion, the solitude of being correct too soon. And now the community is shaken because everything you cautioned about is manifesting. Not because you were louder, but because you became quiet when the commotion no longer warranted your attention. That quiet is your crown. It's your validation. It's your triumph. So don't question yourself now. Don't ponder if you should have struggled more for belief. You were never meant to persuade them. You were meant to declare it and then allow time to verify it. And that's precisely what's occurring. Your quiet is now their instructor. Your quiet is now their reminder. And your quiet will persist as their haunting until they finally confess the truth to themselves. And when they do, remember this. You don't require an apology. You don't require approval. You don't require the mob to applaud because the truth never needed the mob. It just needed you to hold it. And you did. They didn't overlook you. They ostracized you because truth made you uncontainable. Music. Banishment isn't always a penalty. Sometimes it's a tactic by the feeble to control the potent. That's precisely what transpired with you, Awakened One. Your exclusion was never arbitrary, never unintentional. They didn't forget to include you, didn't exclude you by error, and didn't omit you because of happenstance. No, your removal was coordinated. It was intentional. The instant your words pierced their fantasies, you became too risky to retain. You were no longer safe for their structure. And what structure was that? A delicate framework built on quiet, artificial cheer, implicit pacts, and a so-called harmony that functioned only if no one challenged it. The moment you spoke, You disturbed their foundation. And because they couldn't silence your message, they attempted to silence you instead. That's why the murmurs commenced. That's why the subtle disdain, the false sympathy, the defamation campaigns appeared suddenly. It wasn't misunderstanding, it was calculation. They couldn't erase your precision, so they portrayed you as the issue. Isn't it revealing? The one bearing truth becomes the target, while the actual malfunction conceals itself openly. Envision this: a group seated in an auditorium, all pretending the performance is perfect. You're the one who sees the flaws in the set, the visible mechanics, the performers stumbling. Instead of appreciating you, they remove you from the crowd. Why? Because your sight revealed what they were desperate to overlook. You weren't just watching the show, you were shattering the fantasy. And here's the outcome they never anticipated. Banishment didn't silence you, it highlighted you. Because now, as everything you warned about manifests, your absence thunders more powerfully than your presence ever could. The betrayals are appearing. The clandestine agreements are unraveling. The very personas they claimed were genuine are being revealed. And the people who planned your removal, they're shaken because truth has a memory, and it's reiterating every statement you made. So don't believe you were expelled because you were an outsider. The truth is more severe. You belonged too intensely. Your clarity was too keen. Your presence too unsettling. Your insight too irrefutable. They didn't exile you because you were mistaken. They exiled you because you were correct. And now that reality is confirming it, they can't evade what they tried to hide. They requested salvation but refused it when it wasn't beautifully packaged. Individuals seldom reject the truth. They reject the manner of its delivery. That's the paradox of your narrative, awakened one. You weren't a chance event. You were the solution long before they even comprehended the problem. They pleaded for signals. They begged for understanding, for safety, for their opponents' disguises to finally fall. They desired patterns broken, betrayals revealed, and truth uncovered. And when the cosmos responded, it didn't send celestial thunder. It sent you, not with angelic robes or gentle tones, but authentic, direct, and unmistakably human. But there's the dilemma. They didn't recognize you. They anticipated consolation, not confrontation. They wanted the truth to murmur, not to sever. And when you appeared incisive, confident, unwilling to diminish just to ease their discomfort, they were alarmed. You weren't there to participate in dysfunction. You weren't there to placate delusions. You arrived with vision that saw too much and a voice that cut through justifications. That horrified them. So instead of accepting the solution they professed to want, they refused it. Envision this: a person drowning calling for aid. But when the rescue craft arrives, they criticize its appearance and reject it. That's what they did to you. They confused the very thing they needed most for the danger they dreaded. And now the same cycles you tried to halt are detonating around them. The individuals you revealed are displaying their true nature. The betrayals you warned about are no longer murmurs. They are confirmed. And the painful realization is this: their plea was answered. It just wasn't delivered in the soft, easily accepted packaging they envisioned. Here's the question you might pose: why didn't they perceive my true role? Because solutions rarely match people's expectations. They assumed deliverance would be mild, but deliverance often arrives as upheaval. They assumed clarity would soothe, but clarity challenges. And when they pushed you away, they weren't safeguarding themselves. They were obstructing their own recovery. Now the paradox is burning them. They dismissed their salvation only to observe the storm devour everything they were frantic to preserve. And internally they recognize you were never the issue. You were the solution. You weren't the disorder. You were the alarm they tried to disable. Truth doesn't start the blaze. It sounds the alert before the fire erupts. That was you. You weren't chaos. You were the early warning moving among them long before the damage became visible. Your mere presence altered the environment. You didn't arrive with obvious signals, but your energy, your reserve, your penetrating inquiries all conveyed the same meaning. Something is not right here. But here's the reversal. They confused you with the issue. Instead of recognizing you as the alert, they treated you like the disorder itself. They convinced themselves you were over-responding, that you were too perceptive, too distrustful, too swift to identify problems. Why? Because your lucidity disturbed the ease of their denial. You weren't creating issues. You were revealing the issues already brewing underneath. Imagine being in a structure where the fire alarm activates. Instead of investigating for flames, the occupants remove the batteries from the alarm to rest undisturbed. That's exactly what they did with you. They disregarded your signals, delayed your cautions, and selected the fantasy over the disturbance. But fantasies don't preserve lives, alarms do. You were conscious while they were asleep. You were aware while they were indifferent. They anticipated chaos to arrive with loud bangs, but it arrived quietly through your intuition, your discomfort, your unwillingness to participate in dysfunction. That's why they couldn't tolerate you. Your very existence was evidence that something was flawed, and now the fire you detected is at their doorstep. The betrayals are igniting their circles. The secrets are tumbling out like rubble. The repercussions are causing the foundations they swore were solid to collapse. And suddenly they're asking, why didn't anyone speak up? But someone did. You did. Here's the paradox. They muted the one voice that might have saved them this result. They disabled the very alarm that was trying to protect them, not because you were mistaken, but because your warning originated from someone they underestimated, someone they didn't want to acknowledge was correct, and now every outcome reminds them of you. The alert they ignored, the voice they silenced, the signal they can never delete. They weren't sightless. They were willing participants in the falsehood. Cowardice is never a lack of knowledge. It's a decision to see and still act as if you didn't. That's what the community was responsible for. They weren't uninformed, awakened one. They weren't unaware. They witnessed the changes, heard the murmurs, sensed the strain in the room the same way you did. But instead of addressing it, they averted their eyes and turned away. Why? Because truth requires sacrifice. And they weren't prepared to risk their position. Imagine a space filling with smoke. Everyone smells it. Everyone reacts. Everyone looks around anxiously. But instead of evacuating, they continue the celebration, praying no one observes the fire spreading in the structure. You were the one who declared, there's a problem here. And that didn't just reveal the fire, it revealed their commitment to pretending all was well. They weren't perplexed. They were participants. Your bravery was their reflection. The moment you stood firm, their quiet became proof. It wasn't impartiality. It was endorsement. They saw the shadows and selected loyalty over truth. They selected comfort over principle. And when the system targeted you, they allowed it. Not because you were mistaken, but because they didn't want to share the same mark. Think about that. They were cordial to you openly, but deserted you in essence. They left you supporting the weight of truth alone, while they merged with the very dysfunction ruining them. That's not perplexity. That is betrayal, cloaked in passive agreement. Now the storm has arrived. The disguises are off. The figures they supported are exposed. The harmony they believed quiet would maintain has disintegrated into chaos, and the group they clung to is charging directly into catastrophe. Here's the paradox. You weren't the hazard. You were the alert. You weren't the menace. You were the only means of escape. But they selected denial over disruption, and now, as the consequences spread, they are submerged in the very silence they adored. Meanwhile, Theon they exiled, the one they tried to erase, is standing untouched on the bank, holding the same truth they were too scared to carry. And now their understanding complicity demands a higher price than courage ever did. You weren't the force of destruction. You were the illumination that revealed the flaws. People don't despise the truth for its nature. They despise it for what it uncovers within them. That's precisely why you became a threat. You didn't just speak truth. You shattered the fantasy that bound the community together. Theirs was a performance, a meticulously rehearsed act where everyone knew their role. Artificial smiles, courteous agreements, quiet when it was crucial. It wasn't unity, it was theater. And the instant you entered the stage, the script failed. You posed the inquiries no one wished to answer. You highlighted the conduct everyone had accepted. You declined to participate in dysfunction merely to maintain the appearance of peace. And in doing so, you uncovered something frightening for them. That their peace wasn't peace at all. It was a brittle pact to safeguard lies. Your lucidity wasn't chaos. It was a reflection. You didn't break the community. They were already broken. You simply refused to conceal the damage. And that's why they targeted you. They didn't hate you. They hated what your presence disclosed about themselves. Your genuineness made their insincerity unavoidable. Your courage made their fear evident. Your integrity transformed their quiet into proof. Envision this: a home built on instability. Everyone inside adorns the walls, hosts gatherings, pretends it's sturdy. You enter and state, this will not hold. Suddenly, you're the adversary. Not because you falsified, but because you stated the truth prematurely. They gossiped about you. They branded you troublesome, separating, excessive. But internally they knew it wasn't destruction you brought. It was illumination, and that frightened them more than any flame, because illumination spreads. It's infectious. Once one person awakens, others begin to doubt too. That's what they feared most. Now the fantasy has collapsed. The disguises are falling, the secrets leaking, the buried strain exploding, and what remains in the wreckage is confirmation. You weren't the force of destruction. They were. You were merely the light that revealed the flaws. And here's the paradox. The same truth they tried to bury is the only thing that could have rescued them. But they silenced the revealer and honored the lie. And now they're left gasping on the particles of their own shattered fantasy. They named it insolence, but it was actually you perceiving what they dreaded. Labeling someone disrespectful is the fearful person's method of stating you perceive too much. That's precisely what they did to you. They required a term for your refusal, so they distorted your insight into defiance. They claimed you had a problematic attitude, that you were out of line, that you were theatrical or dividing. But let's be honest, what they feared wasn't your opposition. It was your lucidity. You weren't defiant. You were conscious. You observed what they invested years pretending not to see. You questioned the leaders they revered, the so-called foundations of the community who concealed harm and control behind charisma. You identified flaws in the base they termed sacred, and instead of appreciating you, they branded you an issue. Why? Because it's simpler to demonize the truth-bringer than to face the lie. Envision a room where everyone applauds a show they know is fraudulent. You're the one who ceases applauding, who inquires, why are we proving this? Abruptly, you're the antagonist. Not because you were incorrect, but because you violated the unspoken rule. Do not question what everyone else has consented to disregard. You refused to laugh at what wasn't amusing. You ceased sitting passively in spaces where truth was suffocated. You wouldn't show false respect, participate in the games, or trade your integrity for inclusion. That wasn't defiance. That was your spirit rejecting what was fake. And here's the aspect they couldn't confess. Your lucidity made them face their own fear. Because if you were correct, that meant they weren't just sufferers of corruption, but accomplices. Your insight revealed their involvement. So they executed the only action timid people know how to do. They reversed the story and called you the danger. But observe the present. The disguises are breaking. The idols are failing. The truth you saw early is no longer concealed. And suddenly the same individuals who once criticized your resistance are wishing they possessed your sight. Your insight was never disrespect. It was safeguarding. It was foresight. It was perseverance. And now, the ones who dismissed it as pride are struggling with the reality that the only issue was the only person speaking the truth. Your suffering wasn't fragility. It was the mirror that condemned them. Suffering doesn't just transform the one who endures it. It reveals the observers. That's the truth they never anticipated. Your ordeal wasn't random awakened one. It was a test. While they enjoyed their fantasy of tranquility, you were forced into the flames. You withstood betrayal, solitude, and unfairness while they remained silent or even added to your load. They misinterpreted your suffering as fragility. They whispered that you were too vulnerable, too emotional, too damaged. But in truth, your suffering was never solely about you. It was exposing them. How they treated you in your most vulnerable moments became the clearest proof of their true character. Your suffering was the platform, but their responses were the performance. Did they support you? Did they console you? Or did they gossip, ignore, and depart? Every deed was documented, every minor slight, every cold dismissal, every instance they selected ease over courage. It all became evidence of their nature. Imagine a trial where the proof isn't documents but recollections. In that trial, their mockery of your pain replays. Their silence when you appealed reverberates. Their apathy becomes testimony. They believed their minor betrayals were insignificant. But the cosmos was observing, recording every decision, every action, every betrayal. And now the very chaos you warned about is manifesting. The betrayals they justified are surfacing. The leaders they admired are falling. And suddenly they're realizing the frightening truth. How they treated you wasn't incidental. It was the most significant declaration of all. You might ask, why was I selected? Why did I have to endure this? Because your suffering was the test they failed. It wasn't pointless. It wasn't without purpose. It was preparation, certainly, but it was also proof. You became the mirror. They couldn't evade the image of their own hypocrisy. Now, as everything crumbles around them, your endurance stands as judgment. Your suffering became the permanent record they can't delete. And when the debris clears, the measure of their spirits won't be how loudly they celebrated in comfort. It will be how they treated the one who was suffering. You didn't just endure. You became the undeniable proof of their failure. 10. You didn't foresee the future. You revealed the pattern they were already following. History doesn't replay itself. It penalizes those who decline to learn. That's exactly what you uncovered. Awakened One. You weren't making random prophecies like a mystic. You weren't speculating. You were revealing cycles. You saw the design underlying their lives. The concealed structure that kept generating the same betrayals, the same controversies, the same shattered results. They thought you were alerting them about separate incidents, but you weren't indicating surface turmoil. You were uncovering the mechanism beneath it. You saw the inherited dysfunction transmitted like a burden. You observed the emotional obligations accumulating behind their grins. You identified the psychological conflict hiding in their relationships. You weren't predicting a storm. You were showing them the climate system that had been present all along. Envision watching someone enter the same snare repeatedly. You shout, "Stop!" This is the same cycle. But they dismiss you, stating, "This time it's unique." Then the snare closes again. That's what you experienced. You weren't irrational. You were premature. And now they're experiencing the repetition of your cautions, observing everything unfold step by step. The paradox is severe. They believed life's turmoil was random, just misfortune or ordinary conflict. But you understood more deeply. You saw the unhealed injuries forming their decisions. You saw how Denial kept repeating the cycle. You possessed the bravery to identify it, and that's why they turned against you. Because to admit you were correct would mean admitting the turmoil wasn't destiny. It was their own creation. Now the cycle has completed itself. The inherited habits they believed they had escaped are pursuing them. The betrayals they justified are unraveling. The choices they made long ago are confronting them, demanding settlement. And every breakdown, every collapse, every exposed falsehood is confirmation that you weren't predicting. You were reading the pattern they refused to acknowledge. Here's the severe truth. You didn't break the cycle for them, but you revealed it. And now, as they struggle with the repercussions, they're understanding the sequel they're experiencing was authored long before. You saw it, you identified it, they ignored it, and now they're trapped inside the pattern you already read aloud. You weren't intended to fit in. You were positioned to reveal. Separation isn't refusal. It's evidence of purpose. That's the aspect they never comprehended. You were never created to assimilate, Awakened One. You weren't designed to weave yourself into the texture of their false unity. Your presence wasn't accidental. It was intentional. You were placed there not to conform, but to witness, to interrupt, to reflect the truth they continued to escape. They misunderstood your detachment as pride. They claimed you were aloof, too arrogant, too self-assured. But your distance wasn't a sense of superiority. It was lucidity. You didn't withdraw because you believed you were better. You withdrew because you could perceive what they declined to admit. You weren't unfeeling. You were awake. Envision standing in a multitude where everyone's acclaiming a disintegrating building, praising its appeal, while you're the only one noticing the cracks in the base. That's why you couldn't join the applause. That's why you couldn't blend. You weren't there to participate in their social rituals. You were there as the observer, the reflection, the one assigned to identify what was decaying underneath. And here's the truth they never wished to face. Your detachment was their judgment. Your refusal to participate exposed the game. Your silence communicated more than their approval. Every time you distanced yourself from manipulation, corruption, or betrayal, you were raising a mirror that declared, "This is not correct." That made them resent you, not because you were mistaken, but because you saw too transparently. Now the paradox is unfolding. The truth you carried in your separation is appearing in real time. The chaos you perceived from the beginning is colliding with their reality. The leaders they supported are exposed. The cracks you identified have ruptured completely. And suddenly your purpose is undeniable. They perceive it now. Your distance was never arrogance, it was foresight. Your refusal to assimilate was proof you were designated. You weren't there to belong. You were there to disclose. And now the very rejection they used against you has transformed into confirmation. You weren't socially embraced because you were never intended, Toby. You were intentionally placed, and now the truth of that placement is being revealed. Your quiet wasn't submission, It was the trap they entered willingly. Quiet isn't impotence. It's the most powerful instrument in a space full of sound. That's what they never understood. When you ceased participating, they misinterpreted it as loss. They believed you had exhausted your vocabulary, that you were weary, frightened, or crushed under the mass of their falsehoods. But your quiet wasn't terror. It was tactic. You weren't withdrawing. You were preparing the scene. While they scrambled for recognition, conflicting, spreading tales to maintain their fantasies, you selected a different route. You comprehended something they didn't. That time discloses more truth than any debate ever could. You understood the cosmos doesn't require your justification. It uses revelation as its own judgment. So instead of expending your energy on people dedicated to misinterpreting you, you stepped away and allowed reality to compose the narrative. Envision a trial where everyone is yelling, making accusations, attempting to overwhelm you. Instead of screaming in response, you remain calm. You know the proof is about to be presented. That's what your quiet was. It was the serene assurance of someone who already knows the conclusion. And now the unraveling has started. The stances they bragged about are failing. The leaders they defended are exposed. The criticisms they directed at you are returning like unerring missiles. Suddenly, they see that the quiet they ridiculed is more powerful than their acclaim ever was. Here's the sting. Your quiet became the persistent echo in their minds. Every time they replay the lies they told, your calm refusal to engage looms over them like a phantom. While they celebrated short-term wins, you were gathering permanent evidence. While they screamed for approval, you let the truth hone itself in time's fire. They thought you yielded, but your quiet was preparation. It was the waiting strategy. It was the confidence that you didn't need to yell to be correct. You only needed to let existence do the speaking. Now the evidence is everywhere, and your quiet is the only voice that remains. They called it weakness. They called it withdrawal. But it was the most intelligent tactic of all. Because in the end, your quiet didn't just outlast the noise. It overcame it. You weren't the storm. You were the refuge they rejected. They never feared the storm. They feared the one who alerted them it was approaching. That's the truth, awakened one. They depicted you as the disturbance, the turmoil, the peril that endangered their delicate little world. But they misunderstood. You weren't the storm. You were the sanctuary. You were the protection they should have welcomed, the caution they should have heeded, not Theminus they fled. They confused your presence for disruption when in reality it was intervention. You didn't appear to destroy them. You appeared to awaken them. You were the early rumble, the flash meant to stir them from their comfort before the true devastation arrived. But instead of rising to meet the truth, they concealed themselves. They selected comfort over challenge, quiet over bravery, and fantasy over readiness. Envision ignoring the warning siren before a hurricane, covering your ears, and blaming the siren for its volume. That's what they did with you. They thought dismissing you would prevent the storm. But storms don't vanish because you pretend they aren't real. They mistook your warning for peril when the real peril was their refusal to listen. And now the chaos you tried to prepare them for is here. The betrayals are tearing through their lives. The secrets are submerging their circles. The lies they constructed their security on are failing like structures without bases. And in the wreckage, the understanding strikes them. You weren't the foe, you were the rescue. Here's the paradox that wounds the deepest. They thought rejecting you would rescue them. They thought silencing you would guard their fragile order. But in truth, by excluding the one voice that carried lucidity, they invited the storm's full intensity. Justice remembers. Every time they selected convenience over belief, every time they clung to fantasies instead of truth, they sealed their destiny. Now they're standing in the aftermath, drenched, shattered, stunned, realizing the haunting actuality. The storm wasn't you. The storm was their own denial. You weren't destruction. You were the protection. And by fleeing from you, they fled directly into the very catastrophe you were sent to spare them from. And so, awakened soul, as the debris settles and the fantasies collapse, one truth endures. You were never the problem. You were the validation. Every exclusion, every betrayal, every false accusation only verified what you contained within. The whole community is unsettled now. Not because you were loud, but because you were accurate. And now the quiet of your opponents is the most powerful recognition of all. If this message connected with you, tap that like button, subscribe, leave the number 111 in the comments, and share this with someone who requires this truth.